Hey, good afternoon, guys. Hoping you're having a wonderful afternoon today. Sunny hot here in Texas on this Memorial Day weekend. I am Chris Wilson, your host of Grassroots Healing and teaching you how to be an advocate of your health. And wanted to discuss a little bit more on your type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, your dietary lifestyle and habits as they contribute to you getting this metabolic syndrome or disease, if you will. And as we've already talked about type 2 diabetes, it's a reversible disease. And only diet and lifestyle will reverse this disease, and obviously not medications. And as we've discussed, it's partly because or largely due to a dietary issue. But here's the key, it's insulin, which is notorious for causing your weight gain. And if we take insulin, getting prescribed by doctors, that's going to be counterproductive if you are a type 2 diabetic. So most in the medical community call type 2 diabetes an inevitable part of modern life, which obviously isn't true. This epidemic started mainly, or really I guess gaining momentum in the late 1980s. And we can look, and I've got some articles that we can look into about how it became more of a modern epidemic. And as we've mentioned, most of you know that type 2 diabetes, it's a disease caused by too much insulin when our pancreas produces when we eat too much sugar. So the bottom line is too much sugar increases insulin, leads to metabolic syndrome, pre-diabetic states, getting you to type 2 diabetes. So how do we combat the issue? Obvious. We must lower our insulin levels by reducing our dietary intake of sugar and refined carbohydrates, which is form of sugar when it's metabolized or broken down by the body. And I wanted to talk about a drug called metformin, probably one of the most common drugs prescribed to lower blood sugar. But the drug does not rid the body of excess glucose. So instead, it simply continues to take the glucose out of the blood, but it forces its way back into the body in other organs such as the kidneys, your nerves, the eyes, and the heart. And this is how diabetes leads to a whole host of other problems, and then these other problems create other illnesses. And that's why we also see cardiovascular disease and a coronary artery disease, major problems of type 2 diabetics. And so I do have an article pulled up here on PubMed about metformin and berberine. Berberine is a holistic Ayurvedic approach to regulating blood sugar for those who have problem with keeping their blood sugar in check. And so I'll put this article also into the description down below so you can click onto it and read it and share it with folks who you may know that takes metformin or something similar as metformin. But I think metformin is probably the most versatile drug in treatment of common metabolic diseases such as being pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, and it's probably still the most popular among type 2 diabetic patients. And so here's kind of the abstract information of what this article is about. Metformin has been used as a glucose lowering drug for several centuries and is now a first line drug for type 2 diabetes. Let's see, another drug, which it's not a drug, it's an herb, berberine. It was an ancient herbal medicine in treating diarrhea. Ongoing experimental and clinical studies have illuminated great potential of berberine in regulation of glucose and lipid homeostasis, cancer growth, and inflammation. Furthermore, the lipid-lowering effect of berberine is comparable to those conventional lipid drugs, but with lower toxicity. So therefore, it is the right time to transform beneficial effects of berberine into therapeutic practices. Metformin and berberine share many features and actions despite different structure, talking about their chemical compounds or their chemical makeup, and both could be excellent drugs in treating type 2 diabetes, obesity, cardiac disease, tumor, as well as general inflammation. And let's go down here to, so berberine was used in Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine around 3000 BC. The plant berberine was an herbal medicine in treating diarrhea and dysentery. Its constituents were then extracted, among which berberine was the most active alkaloid. And so berberine belongs to the structural class of protoberberines, a plant group that share this chemical compound within their plant. And Berberine has been used as a non-prescription drug in clinics for diarrhea, dysentery, stomatitis, and hepatitis. Numerous researchers have been carried out to unravel its other pharmacological and therapeutic effects, especially on lipid metabolism, tumor, and type 2 diabetes. So they go on to say in this article that diabetes has become one of the most common public health issues due to increased prevalence, morbidity, and mortality caused by complications. Tremendous amount of efforts have been casted to identify effective agents with low toxicity. Let's go back down here to say, hence, in this review, we will summarize recent progresses and studies on mechanisms of their actions and compare their utilities in treatment of several common and interconnected diseases such as diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular diseases, and tumors, as well as inflammation. Talking about berberine. Diabetes, as we've discussed in other videos, they go on to say that it's a progressive metabolic order. There's two categories. They kind of break down type 1 and type 2. Type 2 diabetes starts from insulin resistance, which is attributable to, so they say genetic and environmental factors. You can have a genetic predisposition when you're born based upon the genetics of your parents and the environmental and lifestyles that they had, and that can translate into your own body's DNA code. But as we have discussed, type 2 diabetes is a reversible disease that you can take control of your own health today and rewrite your genetic history by choosing what you put into your mouth and to express which genes to turn on and off. So it's that whole theory about, it's my genes, I'm genetically cursed, is a farce. It's been disproven many times. So we can talk about metformin suppresses hepatic glucose production and stimulates glucose uptake in muscle and adipose tissue, but as we talked about, it doesn't rid the body of the glucose. It shoves it or rams it into other organs into the body. So it's taking it out of the bloodstream, but then forcing it into other organs of the body, creating more problems down the road. 10 to 20 years later, as all of this glucose builds up within other organs, it begins to rot. And so cells begin to rot. Cells begin to break down. Organs begin to break down. And this is why you see people going blind, getting amputated, having end-stage renal disease or kidney problems, strokes, heart attacks, cardiovascular disease, and such. So the effect on berberine on type 2 diabetes was first reported in 1986. In a 3-month trial, 36 patients with type 2 diabetes were randomly assigned with berberine or metformin. It was found that the hypoglycemic effect, that is the lack of sugar, of berberine is comparable to that of metformin. The level of hemoglobin, A1C, fasting and postprandial glucose decreased by 7.5%. Then we get into a meta-analysis of 21 clinical trials revealed that berberine has therapeutic effects on type 2 diabetes, hyperlipidemia, which is an excess of your triglycerides or lipids in the liver in the body, and hypertension, high blood pressure, comparable to other therapeutic regimes. Okay, so we can look at cardiovascular protection against damage by hyperlipidemia. Hyperlipidemia being excess LDL, HDL, excess triglycerides, and cholesterol in the body, mainly the liver where it's stored. Cardiovascular disease has become one of the most severe complications of type 2 diabetes, an important factor for mortality. So with patients that have type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular protection is extremely important because, again, having type 2 diabetes, which is a metabolic syndrome, can kind of cascade into this downward spiral of other chronic illnesses or problems within the body, mainly the heart. Not only the heart, it's not limited to, but one of the main components of type 2 diabetes is having heart issues. They go on to talk about, the effects of berberine and metformin and their close relationship of doing the same thing, metformin being a synthetic drug, berberine being a natural holistic approach. The documentation of the beneficial effects of berberine on cardiovascular disease dates back to the 1980s. Intravenous infusion, IV infusion of berberine in 12 patients with heart failure refractory to digitalis and diuretics led to an acute decrease in peripheral resistance and increase in cardiac index. It's a good thing. Let's go back down to anti-tumor activity. The effects of metformin on tumor have emerged as a hot topic during the last decade or so, and I want to get into the berberine where it talks about on tumor. So there's a lot of I don't want to talk about AMPK and mTOR, which is a mammalian target of rapamycin, but that's a lot of science. I don't feel like breaking that down right now. So it's basically talking about how the berberine affects the mitochondria at a cellular level, and it's very similar comparisons that to metformin, but actually berberine, again, lower toxicity, all natural, and when taken, it has better protective benefits than that of the synthetic chemical makeup of metformin. So the anti-tumor activity of berberine has become increasingly interesting. Up till now, there are more than 600 publications in PubMed by entering berberine in cancer. Berberine has been shown to exert anti-tumor effects through multiple routes, suppressing cell proliferation, metastasis, and angiogenesis, the creation of new blood cells into the cancer types. Cancer cells including breast cancer, gastric cancer, melanoma, and hepatoma. Anti-inflammatory effect. It's accepted that dysregulation of immunity is involved in diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular diseases, and cancer. And it's talking about how berberine and its properties can combat the infiltration of immune cells, such as macrophages, neutrophils to affected tissues where cytokines are secreted. They play roles in the pathogenesis of the diseases. So the anti-inflammatory effect of berberine has been acknowledged for a long history to help protect and fight back against this. Obesity-associated insulin resistance and B-cell dysfunction can reduce serious inflammation. So berberine, via activation of the AMPK route, can exert an anti-inflammatory effect in adipose tissue, fat tissue, induced by a high-fat diet. So that's interesting. So that goes completely contrary against fat will make me fat. It's the types of fats that we're going to be eating to help contribute to losing our weight. Because fat is a buffer for insulin and will help slow the release of insulin into our body by our pancreas, and therefore will reduce and control blood sugar, and therefore lower your insulin resistance. So this is a really excellent article again. So metformin and berberine share many aspects and actions and mechanisms despite different structure, but obviously we see doctors wanting to prescribe metformin in the first line for anti-diabetic drugs, but as we know, metformin doesn't actually rid the body of the glucose. What it does is it forces its way back into the body into other organs. So we don't want to take metformin. If we're going to go a healing route and a holistic approach, we definitely want to change our diet and lifestyle and add in the supplement berberine, which you can buy at health food stores such as Whole Foods, Natural Grocers, and Sprouts, or order on Amazon and online. Berberine is not extensively used in treatment of type 2 diabetes, but I do believe that studies directly compare the efficacy of metformin and berberine in treating type 2 diabetes, and the side effects of berberine are really tolerable and controllable, and they just say maybe if in high doses it can create some mild discomfort in the gastrointestinal area, meaning your stomach. So I really believe that we should use the berberine as a holistic way to lowering or regulating our blood sugars, as opposed to taking synthetic drugs, and changing our diet and our lifestyle by reducing sugars and refined carbohydrates in the diet and increasing really good healthy fats into the diet. AMPK is an AMP-activated protein kinase. It's an enzyme. Your A1C, hemoglobin A1C, it's the ability to transport oxygen to the red blood cells, and when that's high, you get into the metabolic syndrome state. And again, we discussed mTOR, the mammalian target of rapamycin, and we can talk about that at another time. So I'll put this article into the description down below. I also wanted to read to you about reducing your refined carbohydrates and to enjoy your natural fats, and your hyperinsulinemia and fatty liver are the key problems leading to the development of your metabolic syndrome, and this is including obesity. So since refined carbohydrates of all food groups cause the highest rise in your insulin levels, well then it obviously would make sense to lower or to eat less of these refined carbohydrates. Breads, grains, pastas, rice, and things of that nature. Most processed products are made, again, with wheat, corn, rice, and potatoes, and they belong in this group, and they actually increase the production of insulin by spiking the blood glucose in the body. So we want to reduce or avoid refined wheat products, again, such as bread, pasta, waffles, muffins, cupcakes, donuts, burgers, breads that go onto the burgers, and we want to limit our processed corn products, such as popcorn, corn chips, tortillas, and refined potato products, particularly French fries, not only because they're white potato, but because they're fried in nasty, highly expressed, hydrogenated oils, which are super high in omega-6, which is eaten in way more consumption than omega-3s and causes an inflammatory reaction. So, and when we eat white rice as well, which is also a refined carbohydrate in small amounts. We want to take that in small amounts. And so high fructose corn syrup contains 55% fructose, which means it's sugar, not corn. And they did this to introduce it to reduce costs in products and to be able to, it was just a lot cheaper to produce high fructose corn syrup. And it's also found in way many processed foods, and it should be avoided altogether. So we just need to remember that carbohydrates are not bad foods, but traditional societies ate diets heavy in carbohydrates and thrived. We can see that in science, but it's dependent upon their environmental factors and the types of carbohydrates they consumed, not necessarily they just ate a bunch of carbohydrates and lived, but it was mainly the type of carbohydrates. They weren't eating a lot of breads, grains, pastas, wheats, donuts, cupcakes, muffins, rices, waffles. There was a balance to it. Their genetic makeup was a little bit different too, based upon the family they came from and where their region they were located. So the key is to insulin response to these foods, and whole unrefined carbohydrates do not cause nearly the insulin response that white flour does. So we want to replace those refined carbohydrates with fatty fish, olive oil, avocados, nuts and seeds, natural saturated fats found in beef, turkey bacon, your grass-fed butters, and that's also grass-fed beef, cream, coconuts. I mean, these are all really good sources of healthy fats, and I can do a video later talking about healthy fats versus bad fats as well. And eggs are an excellent choice as well, and they're also high in choline, which is a really excellent brain food. So that's just one thing that we need to understand. So remember, the food industry has processed highly refined seed oils, which are high in omega-6 fats, and those aren't recommended because they do cause inflammation and adversely affect human health. And those are your sunflower, corn, canola, safflower, and vegetable oils. You want to eliminate those altogether, or at least regulate your diet to where it's minimized in those as much as possible. And what happens is whenever they are heated, they release harmful chemicals called aldehydes, which is metabolized in the liver, and those are not good because they increase all kinds of bad junk in your body, and rancid oxidation and inflammation goes high when we induce those foods into our body. And we want to stay away from all deep fried foods and all hydrogenated trans fatty acids. So we can do a low carbohydrate, high fat diet, which is kind of like a ketogenic diet, and we could get more into that in another video. If you like the content here, please subscribe and share this video if you know that it will help someone with the information provided, and please tell your friends about it if you know someone who takes metformin, and we can maybe try to help get them off this prescription and get them onto a more natural regime. Don't know why I said regime. More natural regime, and yeah, we can help combat that higher blood sugar problem, insulin resistant problem, get their A1C lowered, and reduce overall metabolic illnesses all the way around. So in the meantime, click that bell icon so you know whenever I put new videos out. We'll be talking about insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, chronic illnesses, type 2 diabetes, and addressing one adrenal fatigue, hyperthyroidism, things of that nature here in upcoming videos. So in the meantime, thank you so much. Be a master and an advocate of your own health, and have a wonderful day and a great Memorial Day weekend. Take care.